Karen was in the middle of her dive when the chaos erupted. One moment she was flying through the air above my pool, drink in hand with that self-satisfied expression, and the next moment she was wailing as if she'd been thrown into a nest of angry wasps. Water splashed in all directions as her body hit the surface, and within moments, nearly half our neighbors were crying out together. Some scratched frantically at their bodies, others stumbled over furniture in their rush to get away, and several unfortunate individuals just collapsed on the lawn, weeping and pleading for someone to contact emergency services. I had just arrived home when my phone chimed with a notification from my backyard security camera marked "Movement detected." I opened the live stream and went rigid with shock. There was Karen, flushed and sliding around in my swimming pool, surrounded by floating pink birds and a music setup, declaring that she was dissolving. I had a single realization: they had jumped into the eel repellent solution. And now I had an entire gathering about to discover what occurs when you host an event in someone else's property without permission, particularly when that person happens to be a marine scientist testing experimental biochemical deterrents. Several weeks prior, when I received authorization to trial a compound formulated to prevent electric eels from accessing high-traffic water areas, my backyard pool, seldom used for recreation and carefully maintained as a testing environment, was ideal for the study. The substance was transparent, nearly without scent, and completely safe for humans during standard application. However, when it combined with chlorinated water and touched skin, it produced a strange and unpleasant feeling that our research documents described as slippery electrical stinging, not harmful or poisonous, but extremely uncomfortable. Precisely what you'd want to make an eel reconsider taking a swim. The only people aware of it were myself, my research colleagues, and the homeowners association leader who had authorized the project on the condition that I display clear warnings and lock the entrance. I did both, large red text stating, "Swam, HOA Poel, Ashiars Parabit." What I hadn't anticipated was Karen. Karen was the type of HOA member who assumed everything in our community was there for her personal use. My driveway served as her emergency exercise space. My mailbox apparently puzzled her since she routinely stuffed her own association flyers into it, and blamed the postal worker when she didn't receive hers in return. We'd had conflicts before, mainly minor issues like her pruning my bushes to suit her preferences or objecting that my backyard vegetation wasn't visually coordinated with the street's aesthetic. But this situation was entirely different. I had departed for a 3-day marine science conference in another state and thought nothing of it. My house was protected, my property was secured, my surveillance was active. Yet somehow Karen had concluded that my absence meant an open invitation. Based on later reports from my neighbors, she had announced during the HOA community meeting that she would be organizing the annual neighborhood unity gathering. When questioned about the location, she gestured casually and replied, "Don't worry, I've made arrangements with a friend." That friend was supposedly me, and those arrangements involved her breaking off the warning signs, cutting through the back gate lock with bolt cutters, and transforming my private space into what looked like a community hall. She had set up tents, a food table, decorative torches, and a wireless speaker blasting 80s hits. She even hired a local teenage DJ who had no idea he was participating in trespassing on a chemically treated research site. What happened after her initial plunge was mayhem. She didn't just yell, she thrashed, splashed, and pulled 2 other guests back into the water with her. One person, a man wearing bright green swim shorts, attempted to climb out using the pool wall and slip, knocking over an entire cooler of wine drinks. Another stumbled over a garden ornament and fell face first into my flower bed. Children wept, adults screamed, a neighbor cried that she couldn't see, and Karen blamed me for sabotaging my own pool specifically to spite her. The irony struck me as I walked through the gate, phone still recording the pandemonium. Karen made eye contact with me and shouted, "What have you done? Why would you do this to us?" I stopped just before reaching the patio and calmly stated, "This is an active research pool." The warning signs were removed, the gate was damaged, and you, Karen, are standing in Eel Deterrent compound designed to simulate the feeling of an electric predator. So unless you're a South American freshwater creature, I recommend exiting immediately. She appeared ready to burst with rage, her face twitching between shock and fury. Then she grabbed her towel and marched off, dripping wet and ranting about legal action and lasting nerve damage. The remaining guests followed in a slow, sticky procession, many mumbling apologies and clutching their tingling skin as if they'd been dipped in shampoo mixed with menthol cream. One man leaned over and whispered, "That was the most awful pool I've ever experienced. What was in that water?" I replied simply, "Research." By evening, the yard was destroyed. Paper cups floated in the water, broken sandals and melted ice treats littered the concrete. The inflatable pink birds remained like shocked witnesses. I spent the following hours emptying the pool, recording the destruction, and submitting a complete incident report to the HOA board and local police. The compound itself hadn't caused actual injury, but the property violation, destruction of posted warnings, and unauthorized gathering constituted multiple infractions. I even attached timestamped security recordings showing Karen cutting the zip tie from the gate, ripping off the red warning tape like it was bothersome decoration, and gesturing dramatically like some sort of suburban monarch claiming her territory. But here's the unexpected twist: while the HOA had been putting up with Karen for years, they had never witnessed her behavior documented this clearly or displayed so publicly. One board member contacted me within a day asking permission to show my video at the next meeting. Another sent me a screenshot of a neighborhood chat group titled Poolgate, with dozens of messages saying things like, "Did you see Karen's expression when she got out?" And so that's what that pool was for. I thought it was a fish pond. news traveled quickly. By week's end, Karen had gone from neighborhood queen to viral cautionary tale. But this wasn't finished, not by any means. Karen wasn't the type to retreat after a single humiliation. She was just getting started. She had been burned, both figuratively and chemically, and now she was seeking revenge. What I hadn't expected was how extensively she'd go to turn the community against me, or how deeply she'd dig herself in before realizing she'd been holding the shovel the wrong way. This tale wasn't just about one ruined party. It was about entitlement, science, and the beautiful poetic justice of watching someone dive into the very pool they attempted to steal, only to learn it fights back. The morning following the pool party catastrophe, I woke to discover 3 voicemails from unfamiliar numbers, one HOA board email requesting an emergency meeting, and a passive-aggressive message from Karen herself that simply read, "You'll be sorry for humiliating the entire HOA." As I stood on my patio with coffee, looking out at the drained pool still slick with residual Eel Deterrent compound, I realized this situation was nowhere near resolved. What I didn't anticipate was how rapidly Karen would escalate from soaking wet to full suburban combat. The cleanup had barely started when I heard Karen's voice carrying over the fence, complaining loudly to a group of morning joggers. She stood on her porch with her arm in a bandage that appeared far more dramatic than medically necessary. She pointed toward my property as she told her audience how I had set traps in a neighborhood pool using industrial poisons. Her precise words. One woman gasped, another asked if it was safe to walk nearby, and Karen nodded gravely like she had barely survived an explosive device. A few hours later, she went house to house with printed flyers claiming I had converted my property into a dangerous testing facility without informing the HOA. In bold capital letters, it stated, "Diakinode has poel next door." Below is a photograph of the pool during the party with everyone screaming and slipping, edited to remove the DJ setup and Karen's personal involvement. She listed fabricated chemical names like Neuroskin Gel X and Amphibian Acid Gel, neither of which existed, and cited completely invented symptoms like delayed brain fog and chronic skin reversal. Several neighbors later brought me the flyer with worried expressions, asking if I was developing some sort of biological weapon. I calmly explained the compound again, showed them the paperwork, and reminded them it had been approved in writing by the HOA itself. Most nodded and thanked me. One neighbor, a retired science teacher, even laughed and said, "This Karen can't tell the difference between fish food and formaldehyde." By that afternoon, Karen's story had evolved. Now she was claiming I had used the compound as a personal revenge scheme, because she once asked me to trim my hedges. She stood at the end of the cul-de-sac loudly detailing her version of events while recording on her phone like she was auditioning for a reality TV court show. I tried to ignore her, but when she accused me of endangering children and shouted that I had declared chemical warfare on the community, I decided it was time to respond more publicly. The HOA emergency meeting was scheduled for that evening in the clubhouse. I arrived with a folder containing signed permits, HOA emails, photos of the warning signs before they were destroyed, and the footage of Karen cutting the gate tie and inviting guests in with her amplified voice. Karen arrived 10 minutes late wearing a neck brace and sunglasses like she had just survived a safari accident. The moment she sat down, she pointed at me and declared, "I demand his pool be condemned. He's a threat to the neighborhood." I calmly placed the folder on the table and distributed printed packets. One for each board member. No raised voice, no accusations, just evidence. The room fell into uncomfortable silence as the board reviewed the proof. Karen, clearly shaken, tried to interrupt. She accused me of falsifying the video, claimed the signs weren't there when she arrived, and even insisted she had verbal permission to host the party. When asked from whom, she replied, "The community spirit." Everyone just stared at her. The board president, a quiet but firm woman named Cynthia, leaned forward and said, "Karen, this isn't the first time you've taken liberties with property that doesn't belong to you. What you did was trespassing. You destroyed signage, damaged research property, and hosted a public event on private land without consent." Karen sputtered, saying she had been trying to unite the neighborhood. Cynthia responded, "And instead, you brought us a legal liability." Karen stormed out before the meeting concluded, muttering about attorneys and conspiracies. The board officially ruled in my favor, acknowledged the legitimacy of the research project, and issued Karen a formal warning for misconduct. But her war wasn't over, it had only changed tactics. The next day, a white city vehicle pulled into my driveway. 2 city inspectors stepped out and introduced themselves politely but firmly. Someone had filed an anonymous report claiming my property contained illegal chemicals and biohazardous waste that violated zoning laws. I showed them the same folder. Within 5 minutes, one of the inspectors paused, looked up, and said, "Wait, aren't you Dr. Wells from the Eel Deterrent Symposium?" It turned out he had attended my recent conference in Dallas. Not only was he familiar with the compound, but he also congratulated me on the published paper that had accompanied our research trials. He chuckled and said, "This report must have been filed by someone who watches too many late-night sci-fi movies." They inspected the pool, reviewed the documentation, and concluded that everything was in compliance. The moment they left, I saw Karen peeking from behind her curtain, phone in hand, filming them like she was waiting for them to arrest me. When they drove away with a wave and thumbs up, I could practically see her deflate. I thought that might slow her down. It didn't. She started a neighborhood Facebook group titled "Clean Streets, Safe Pools," and filled it with edited videos, screenshots from random chemical articles, and conspiracy-style memes warning people to stay away from my yard. At one point, she posted a blurry picture of a jellyfish and captioned it, "This is what's breeding next door." Half the neighborhood joined out of curiosity. A few commented with sarcasm, like one guy who wrote, Pretty sure I saw Godzilla back there too. And another who posted a photoshopped image of my pool glowing radioactive green with the caption, Knightmares, Part 3. Despite all this, I kept my response professional. I sent a polite but firm cease and desist letter regarding the false claims. I continued draining and preparing the pool for the next round of testing, and I updated my signage with larger warnings and added motion lights just in case she tried anything again. For a few days, it seemed like things might calm down. Then I woke to find my mailbox stuffed with what looked like shredded printouts. Upon closer inspection, I realized Karen had printed over 50 pages of the FDA's chemical registration database and dumped them in my box. Each page was circled in red ink as if any of them proved something sinister. She even drew arrows and wrote in shaky handwriting, "Explain this." At this point, even the mailman gave me a sympathetic look and said, "Buddy, I've seen some things, but this one's not right." But I wasn't just going to sit back and keep playing defense. It was time to flip the script. If Karen wanted the whole neighborhood to think I was running a backyard horror lab, I'd show them exactly what I was doing, openly, transparently, and scientifically. And with a little showmanship, I was about to turn the tables with logic, laughter, and a lesson in marine biology she'd never forget, because nothing terrifies a Karen more than facts delivered with applause. I spent the next week planning an event I called Science in the Suburbs. It was part damage control, part community outreach, and part revenge wrapped neatly in the language of education and open-door transparency. The goal wasn't just to correct Karen's misinformation. It was to expose it, dismantle it, and replace it with actual facts while inviting the neighborhood to witness the truth with their own eyes. I had flyers printed, not unlike the ones Karen had distributed, except mine had real dates, cheerful graphics, and actual facts. The flyer read, "Want to know what's really in the pool? Come learn about marine science with demonstrations, snacks, and safe hands-on exhibits." I even invited a few colleagues from the university to join as guest presenters. They were more than happy to help, especially once I told them what had happened. Nothing motivates academics like turning a backyard into a battlefield of reason against nonsense. Karen, of course, found out about the event almost immediately. She tried to sabotage it before it even began. 2 days before the event, someone dumped a bag of dirt and old leaves into my freshly cleaned pool. My camera caught blurry footage of someone in a hoodie doing it after midnight. While the face wasn't visible, the gate was unmistakably Karen's. I didn't report it, just cleaned it up and made a mental note that the Eel compound wasn't the only thing that needed to be washed away. The morning of the event arrived sunny and perfect. I had folding chairs arranged on the lawn, 3 display tables with laminated information sheets about marine repellents, a touch tank filled with rubber models to show how we test behavior without harming animals, and a giant whiteboard titled, Myth vs. Science Karen Edition. That last one was my favorite. On one side, the pool contains acidic neurotoxin gel, the water burns skin off, the pool breeds jellyfish. The other side had our responses. The compound is registered non-toxic and used in field tests around the world. The sensation is uncomfortable but temporary and not harmful. There are no jellyfish. This is not the Gulf of Mexico. To my surprise, nearly 40 people showed up. Parents with curious kids, elderly couples, even a few teenagers who had been at the original party and wanted to know what had actually happened. I gave a quick speech explaining the basics of the project. Then Dr. Cohen, a guest marine chemist, gave a demonstration using beakers of colored water and samples of the compound in its raw and diluted state. The audience watched in amazement as the compound reacted with small electric currents and changed texture, showing exactly how it would deter eels while remaining safe for people. The kids loved it. They squealed every time the compound fizzled in contact with salt water. One child, maybe 8 years old, turned to his mom and whispered, "I want to be a fish scientist." I couldn't stop smiling. Right as Dr. Cohen finished his presentation, Karen showed up. She didn't come through the gate or the side path like a normal guest. She marched down the middle of my driveway like she was inspecting enemy territory. She wore a floral sun hat, huge sunglasses, and a scarf that flapped dramatically with each step. Several guests turned to watch her as she planted herself next to the whiteboard and pointed at the words, "Myth versus Science," with a theatrical gasp. "I came here to see your so-called science," she said loudly, "but all I see is propaganda." She held up her phone to record, panning slowly across the guests in the yard. "Are you all seriously buying this?" she asked. "The man poisoned a public pool and you're applauding him." I stepped forward and said calmly, "Karen, this was never a public pool. It's private property approved for research, and the signs you tore down made that clear." As I spoke, Dr. Cohen added, "And the pool was only hazardous if you dove in uninvited while it was clearly marked as restricted. Just like someone did last week when they dumped yard waste in it." Karen's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. "That's a baseless accusation," she snapped. "I don't sneak around like some criminal." I glanced at the camera above the garage and simply said, "Well, someone should tell that to the hoodie-wearing figure caught on night vision." That brought a few stifled laughs from the crowd. Karen waved a flyer of her own. It was one of her old panic sheets claiming I had introduced toxins into a residential area. She waved it like a flag. "You may have tricked these people with your charts and buzzwords, but I won't stop until the city shuts this whole thing down." I took the flyer from her hand, held it up, and read aloud, "Chronic skin reversal." "Karen, that's not a thing. You made it up." One of the teens whispered loudly, "That sounds like a magic spell gone wrong," and the crowd burst into laughter. Karen's face went red. She spun on her heel and stormed out, muttering something about lawyers and how this wasn't over. But it was too late. The damage was done to her. For the first time, The neighborhood had seen her outrageous claims fall apart in real time. They saw the science, they met the researchers, and they watched her unravel in broad daylight. After the event, several guests stayed to help clean up. A few even offered donations to support the research. The mood was light, almost festive. It felt like I had finally reclaimed my own backyard, not just physically but socially. People who had been wary or confused were now supportive, even curious. I received 3 invitations to local science nights, and one family offered to let me test a different version of the compound in their fish pond. It was more than I expected, and it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, Karen's grip on the neighborhood was starting to slip. But Karen wasn't done. That night, just when I thought the worst was behind me, I caught something strange on my security feed. 3 teenagers sneaking into my yard after dark, tiptoeing toward the pool with something large and heavy. I watched as they struggled with gallon jugs, unscrewed the lids, and began pouring what looked like bleach into the water. My heart dropped. Not because of the property damage, but because I recognized one of the kids, Karen's son. I hit the lights and the siren. They froze like deer in headlights. I stepped outside with my phone recording. "Gentlemen," I said, "you've just been caught on camera vandalizing an active research site. That's a felony." The boys bolted, slipping on the wet tiles as they scrambled for the fence. I called the police. Within the hour, I had a report filed, copies of the footage saved, and a formal complaint logged with the HOA. The next morning, Karen was already outside screaming that I had traumatized her son. She said I was a monster for calling the cops and claimed the kids were just playing a prank. "You've gone too far this time," she shouted. I walked outside holding the police report and said, "Actually, Karen, I think you'll find that trespassing, vandalism, and endangering minors is what went too far." Her face paled. For once she had no comeback. She turned and went inside without another word. I knew then that she was finally beginning to realize that this wasn't just a neighborhood spat anymore. This was real, and her lies, schemes, and tantrums were now on full public display. She hadn't just lost the community's sympathy, she'd lost their trust. And next, she was about to lose the only thing she valued more than control, her reputation. The calm after the chaos didn't last long. Karen had taken a hit to her pride, but if I had learned anything about her by now, it was that she didn't retreat quietly. Instead, she shifted strategies. If she couldn't get me arrested or banned through misinformation, she would try to destroy me with politics and perception. It started with a petition printed on glossy paper and labeled HOA Emergency Action Form. It claimed my property was unsafe for residential zoning, and that I was harboring dangerous chemicals that posed a threat to children. Began canvassing door to door again, this time carrying a binder of blurry screenshots and phrases like hazardous exposure and ongoing risk. What she didn't realize was that most neighbors had already seen her tantrum at the science event, and the bleach dumping incident was now quietly being discussed on the HOA message board. A few neighbors humored her, nodding politely, but more than one forwarded me photos of her petition with captions like, "This is getting sad," and "She's losing it fast." And still, she wasn't deterred. She went bigger. She started tagging the city's official accounts in dramatic social media posts, trying to get local media involved. Her posts had titles like "Suburban Scientist Endangering Children" and "Home Becomes Biolab." One featured a heavily filtered photo of my house with lightning bolts photoshopped in the background. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so deranged. A few of my colleagues texted me screenshots of her public rants and asked if I needed a lawyer. I told them not yet, but that I was documenting everything, every flyer, every message, every accusation. It wasn't just about defending my work anymore. Karen had crossed the line and I was done playing nice. Around this time, the HOA president, Cynthia, finally returned from a trip she had taken during most of the madness. I filled her in on what had happened, showed her the police report, the bleach incident, the security footage, and the ongoing harassment campaign. She listened in silence, flipping through the evidence. Then she looked up and said, "We're calling a full HOA board review." She scheduled it for the following week and made it clear it would be mandatory. Karen tried to wriggle out of it by claiming medical issues, but the board didn't budge. The meeting would happen with or without her. When the day arrived, the clubhouse was more crowded than I had ever seen it. Word had spread beyond our neighborhood. Residents from adjacent blocks came just to witness what had become the most talked about HOA debacle in recent memory. I arrived early, set up a table with all the documentation again, and quietly took a seat near the front. Karen strutted in 20 minutes late, dressed like she was attending a press conference. She wore a navy blazer, pearl earrings, and carried a thick manila folder stuffed with who knew what. As soon as she sat down, she loudly declared she would be recording the meeting for legal purposes. Cynthia nodded and said, "That's fine. Just know that we're recording too." But the meeting began with a statement from Cynthia outlining the events of the past few weeks. She was calm but firm, laying out the incidents chronologically and without embellishment. She mentioned the unauthorized party, the trespassing, the signage removal, the bleach dumping, the false accusations, and the social media smear campaign. Every point was supported by timestamps, emails, or footage. Karen sat frozen, her eyes darting around the room like she was looking for a lifeline. When it was her turn to respond, she stood up and opened her folder dramatically. She started reading a long-winded statement about community safety, how her only concern was the well-being of children, and how she had tried to raise awareness out of civic duty. Her voice trembled, not from emotion but from the sheer weight of keeping up the performance. At one point she pointed at me and said, "He's turned our neighborhood into a science experiment. What if next time it's radioactive? What if someone dies?" I expected more outrage, but instead the room fell into quiet disbelief. Someone in the back muttered, "You've got to be kidding." Another resident, a mother of two, raised her hand and asked Karen directly, "Did you actually get permission to use his yard for your party?" Karen dodged the question. Cynthia asked again, "Did you have written or verbal consent?" Karen shifted and said something vague about community precedent and needing a central location. Cynthia pressed her again. Karen snapped, "Well, I thought it was implied." The entire room seemed to exhale at once. That single sentence, "I thought it was implied," was the nail in the coffin. Cynthia turned to the board and asked if there were any motions. One member raised her hand and proposed Karen be removed from her self-appointed role as community events liaison and fined personally for damages to my property. Another member added a motion that Karen be barred from initiating or hosting any AOA-sponsored events for the next 12 months. The vote was unanimous. Karen looked stunned, like the floor had disappeared beneath her. For a moment she just stood there, blinking, clutching her folder like a life vest. Then she began to sputter, calling the meeting biased, illegal, rigged, and claimed the AOA had been hijacked by science cultists. No one responded. The meeting was officially adjourned. By the next morning the news had traveled fast. Someone had leaked a clip of Karen's horn-plied consent remark to a local community news blog, which titled the article, "How a Woman Gets Burned by Her Own Words in HOA Drama." The clip was shared on Facebook, Instagram, and even made its way to a TikTok reel with thousands of likes and comments. My personal favorite was one that read, "You can't make this stuff up. Karen versus science, the battle we didn't know we needed." Suddenly, the same people who once doubted me were cheering me on. I got thank you notes in my mailbox, a few residents brought cookies, and one guy dropped off a case of pool cleaner with a note that said, "Thought you could use backup ammo." But the ultimate blow to Karen came 2 days later when a local news crew knocked on my door. They were filming a human interest segment about unusual neighborhood disputes and wanted to feature the story. At first, I hesitated, but after confirming the segment would focus on scientific outreach and misinformation, I agreed. They interviewed me in the backyard with my pool sparkling in the background and the warning signs clearly visible. I explained the research, the compound, the community science event, and the importance of critical thinking in suburban communities. When asked about Karen, I simply said, "Sometimes people fear what they don't understand. It's our job to make knowledge louder than fear." The segment aired that weekend, and by Monday Karen was nowhere to be seen. Her curtains were drawn, her car was absent, and her lawn, once obsessively manicured, had started to yellow. Word on the street was she had taken a short-term leave from the HOA altogether. Whether it was embarrassment, pressure, or just exhaustion, I didn't know. But for the first time in weeks, the street felt peaceful again. No flyers, no shouting, just the low hum of sprinklers and the occasional bark of a dog. I walked out to my backyard, sipped my coffee, and stared at the pool, clean, calm, and clear. It felt like I had finally reclaimed not just my space but my standing in the community. But I wasn't going to let that calm dull my instincts. I knew Karen too well to think she was truly finished. She'd retreat, regroup, and eventually try to claw her way back into relevance. But now I was ready. With the neighborhood behind me, the facts on my side, and every word she ever said recorded or documented, I no longer saw her as a threat. I saw her for what she really was, a warning sign, one that said, "Entitlement ahead, proceed with reason," and a hidden camera. A week passed, and for the first time in months things were quiet. Not eerily quiet, not suspiciously quiet, just the kind of peaceful lull that made you realize how much energy you'd been burning fighting off insanity. Karen hadn't been seen since the HOA meeting where she imploded in front of half the neighborhood. Her blinds were shut, her yard was overgrown, and her car hadn't moved from the driveway. I half expected her to emerge with another list of demands or a megaphone, but nothing came. The HOA board moved on. Cynthia sent out a community update about upcoming improvements and encouraged residents to sign up for Neighborhood Watch in a bid to restore unity. It was all pleasantly boring, exactly what I needed, but deep down, I knew Karen wasn't gone. She was just waiting for her next entrance, like a villain in a bad sequel nobody asked for. That entrance came sooner than expected, and in a form so ridiculous it almost didn't feel real. One Saturday afternoon I hosted a follow-up event for the local kids and families who had enjoyed the Science in the Suburbs showcase. It wasn't a huge production, just a backyard picnic, a few simple demonstrations, and a short presentation about the next phase of the Eel compound trials. I'd even drained and cleaned the pool completely this time, replacing the compound-treated water with normal chlorinated water just to avoid any confusion. I hung new signs, added a few banners, and grilled hot dogs for the parents. It was wholesome, quiet, and entirely benign. Halfway through a presentation about how the compound affected electric current sensitivity in aquatic creatures, someone gasped and pointed toward the side gate. Karen was back. She didn't kick down the gate or yell, but she slipped in like she belonged there, dressed in a flowing sundress, oversized hat, and holding a pie. Yes, a pie. She smiled sweetly and said, "I just wanted to make peace and support the kids." For a brief moment, everyone was too stunned to respond. Karen walking in with dessert felt like a glitch in reality. She walked toward the table, placed the pie down, and started making small talk with a group of parents. I watched her carefully. She was smiling too much, laughing at things no one said, and complimenting everything around her. It was the most awkward performance I'd seen since high school theater. After a few minutes, she made her way toward me. "You know," she said with a strange smile, "I think we both went too far. This neighborhood has been torn apart, and I'd really like to move forward." I nodded slowly, unsure what her angle was. That's when she dropped it, the real reason for her visit. "I've spoken to a few people, and we were thinking it might be nice to bring back the HOA Summer Bash. I thought maybe your yard could be the venue again." It's the biggest. You're kind of a local celebrity now. I blinked. Was she really asking to throw another party in the same place she nearly turned into a chemical panic zone? I couldn't believe her gall. Before I could answer, she added, "Of course, this time we'd use regular water. No science stuff, just something simple. Community fun, nothing experimental." I paused, then smiled. "Karen," I said, "I appreciate the gesture, but if you want to host a party, I suggest you get permission from whoever owns the place you plan to host it on. Because this yard, it's still mine." Her smile cracked slightly, but she kept her composure and nodded. Of course," she murmured, then turned to walk away. She didn't storm off like before, she didn't rant, but something in her posture was tight, calculated. The pie was left untouched. That night, my motion sensor light flicked on around midnight. I checked the feed, no one was visible, but something had definitely moved near the fence. The next morning, I discovered the kiddie pool I had used for a demonstration had been refilled with water. It had been empty before. I dipped a testing strip into the water and frowned. The pH was off too high. I ran a quick chemical check and discovered traces of household cleaning agents. Bleach again, but diluted. Someone had dumped a mix into the pool. A warning, a message, a last-ditch act of defiance. I drained it immediately, cleaned the surrounding area, and updated the security footage time log. That was the final straw. I printed out the footage, cross-referenced the timestamps, and called another meeting with the OA board. I laid everything out again. Karen's sudden reappearance, her attempts to regain access, the suspicious chemical reintroduction. Cynthia sighed deeply and asked, "What does she want at this point?" I responded, "Control. Same as always, she needs to feel like she's still the center of the neighborhood, that she can get away with anything." The board agreed unanimously to take the matter a step further. Karen would be officially reported for harassment and property tampering. They also initiated a permanent restriction preventing her from serving on any HOA subcommittee or organizing community events indefinitely. It wasn't exile, but it was close. Still, I felt like there was one more message that needed to be sent. Not out of spite,